to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Hope Gibbs. Hope, I am so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so thrilled to be here.
I know we are going to have so much fun, and I would love for you to start with how did you get into writing?
Well, I kind of stumbled into writing. About 5 years ago, my second son was getting ready to go to college, and I had been a stay-at-home mom for almost at that point 2 decades. And I started realizing, yeah, my life is getting ready to change. At 50, I will be an empty nester. And I hadn't worked since I left the job force when I had my first son. So I started journaling. A friend said, start journaling your feelings. And that lasted about a week. I did not like journaling my feelings or my goals. And before I noticed, I was creating this whole character. I didn't know who she was. I had no idea where she was going, but I had her in mind. So I kept kind of playing around with it. And a few months later, all I had were some secondary characters, but I wasn't telling anyone I was writing because I didn't know what I was doing. And I was in church of all places, and our minister said the name Bob Dylan. And so, not that I wasn't listening, but when you hear Bob Dylan from the pulpit, you kind of sit up a little straighter. And then he said the four words that changed everything. He said a song I had never heard of called Tangled Up in Blue. And I went, now I know where Penny is going. And I left there. And a year later, I typed the words "the end." Now, originally that was the name of my book up until last summer when I had to change it to Where the Grass Grows Blue, but the essence was still there. And so it took about from the idea to getting it ready to query, it took me about 4 years just to write, rewrite, edit, edit some more. So that's kind of how I wrote this book.
I love that, and I have goosebumps just hearing you say that. Where you got the inspiration, it was almost kind of like a little like divine breadcrumb dropping in right then, going, here's your next step, with just that inspiration and that little feeling. I love that you left so inspired. So would you continue down that path? So you get home and you start writing differently. It's not journaling now. It's starting to see where this will take you. What was happening then? What was coming up?
Well, I knew that my character, I knew she was going to be in Kentucky. I knew the story, the essence of the story was going to take place in Kentucky. But there was more about blue. I wanted to do layers of blue. I knew that. So my protagonist at the beginning, her name is Penny Ray Crenshaw. She's living this, nice life in Atlanta. She has 3 children, lives in a very nice part in Buckhead. I don't know if you're familiar with that part of Atlanta. And one day she stumbles across her husband's affair in a very interesting way, confronts him, and he leaves her for her Pilates instructor. And so then you fast forward a year later, and he's already remarried. She's adjusting to being a single mom, and her beloved grandmother from Kentucky has died, leaving her this house, which Penny has no idea why she does. And when her husband is taking the children for his summer vacation, that's when she realizes it's time to go back to Kentucky. So I started just thinking, she's tangled in blue. I mean, she's tangled with her memories. She had a very tough childhood in Kentucky. She's tangled with her new life. She is tangled up in blue. And so it just kind of went from there. And then I wrote it and I thought, the end. It's the hard part's over. And I realized I was nowhere near ready to put this out there. I did so much telling. Then I started reading books on showing, not telling. And it took me about a year to get it ready, to find an editor to help me get it in the right, because it was 120,000 words. I am not one of those people that has to add at the end. I have to cut. So I had to take 120,000 words and get it down to 94.
So let's talk about this a little bit more. So the first pass, relatively speaking, was a lot of telling.
Oh,
How
yes.
did you go through and discern when you wanted to keep the telling and when it needed to shift and be more showing? Because you need both, really. If you show everything, it's going to drag. And if you tell, it's going to move fast, but it's going to have an element of feeling detached. So and then some pieces don't feel like they fill in so much. So would you talk about how you went through that process to discern what to do when?
Well, first off, I read a lot of books. I love to read. I can read a book a day. I'm a very fast reader. I've been a critique partner for other people, or a beta reader, and they're shocked how quickly I get back with them. But I really just had to ask myself, what is this paragraph doing? Is this necessary? Is this making my story go forward? And then I had kind of an information dump. Chapter 4 was an information dump, and I knew I had to rework it. So it's in a flashback, which was also very helpful because it gives my reader insight, valuable insight on when Penny was a young girl. This is kind of who she has become. And I was able to put together a scene, like the girls are kind of spying on their grandmother and their mother, and they're hearing the conversation. And then I would be able, the next paragraph, kind of explain a little bit, but then the next scene, it goes back to dialogue. So mixing in a lot of dialogue also helped me with that. But I had to get rid of the information dump because it was quite frankly, I gave the history of Penny Crenshaw. But what I did end up, I showed you through her eyes as a 5-year-old girl. And it was a pivotal moment. And I introduced her sisters, and I introduced the grandmother and the mother. So but I would say books, articles, anything I could get my hands on.
So to your point, it felt like an info dump. But the other side to that too is the fact that when you were writing that first pass, at least, it's you getting to know that character, you getting to know all of the characters and what they're about, and finding your voice at the same time. So the fact that when you're coming back through and it's you recognizing, oh, this is an info dump. Okay, but you had to do that to, one, keep writing, to keep moving forward. And the other was that info dump was necessary for you to further develop your characters, to make them feel multidimensional versus just like one-sided. You were really using that to help yourself get to know her and her siblings, her grandparents, whomever else, to really develop the rest of the story. So I love that you recognized it after, like on the next pass or the following pass after that, versus getting hung up in the writing to begin with and saying, oh wait, this is, maybe I'm telling too much here, maybe I'm going into way too much, and stopping. I like that you just kept on going and then worked through it on an editing pass, really.
Yeah, editing, I did 2 full content edits before I even sent out that first letter to publishers, because I wanted it to be very tight. And even after I signed my contract with my publisher, I had to do another content round, but that round was a lot easier. And also I needed to add a chapter at the very end because my content editor's like, I don't know why Penny's not doing this and this and this. And I said, oh, well, my first editor said it wasn't necessary. And she said, I need that. And I was like, I have that scene. I never throw away anything. I am a writing pack rat. And I've actually used things from my first book, and Where the Grass Grows Blue, for my work in progress. It's almost finished. I was able to change it up a little bit. So I never throw away anything I write.
I think that's a great point, that just because you've written something for the first book, 120,000 words needed to scale to, and in the sense of going down to 94,000, but that's 30,000 something, 30,000 words. What else could you do with that? Could they be turned into, excerpts for something else? Could they be used for teasers and social media? What else could you do with it? Could it be a scene or something else that lends itself into a subsequent book, or even if it's a tangent or a sequel, however it turns out? So I love that you shared that. So how did you know when to cut them? When you have that much going on and you love all of it. So how do you know?
There were some painful cuts because there were scenes that I just loved, and I love to describe. I'm a very descriptive writer about, her home. I go into detail, I go into flowers, but there were scenes that did not move the book along. I loved them. I thought they were great, but they didn't move it along. And the funny thing is that my epilogue in my final version was in chapter 2. And I was told, you've got to get rid of it. I love the scene, but you've got to get her to Kentucky. And I just could not think about losing that scene. I tweaked it, put it at the end, and my editor was like, I can't believe you did that. That's perfect. This is the way to end this story. So also, if you really believe in something, find a way to keep it. But then you also, in the words, I think is it Stephen King who says, kill your darlings? You have
Yeah.
to kill your darlings. And in my second book that I've written, I realized I had too many characters. And so I had to kill one of my characters, and I took some of her backstory and characteristics and blended it with another character. So my book at 120,000 doesn't show and tell you as much as my book at 94,000. So editing is essential.
I love that. That's music to my ears, being someone who is a developmental editor.
Oh, but it's painful. It hurt. It
Yes,
hurt.
yes. It does. But you've hit on something really important. I hear two things. One of which is that you believed in your vision and you took the feedback and discerned when to incorporate it and when to say thank you, but I have a vision for what I'd like to do and I want to incorporate it, but you found a way to do that honored the story and made it stronger, made it better even. And you also worked with an editor to come through that because you took your book from one level to another level. You realized that there was strength in cutting, but more so strength in working with somebody else to help not just move the story, but move your writing forward. So how did you go about finding the editor that you worked with, and what was that like on your process of, as you're learning through all of this and you're getting feedback, you got to cut, you're re-racking things and you're working with someone. What was that like and how did you work through that?
So no one at that point had read one word when I looked for an editor. I did not have critique partners. I did not have beta readers because, again, most of my friends had no idea what I was doing. They saw me running around town with my laptop because I've been known to pull out my laptop at games, because having 5 children and I'm the mother of 5, they were having games, and at halftime I would be typing. So finally I decided I was ready to let this go and see if I could do something with it. And I hired someone that I found through the internet, because there was, there's so many resources, and I found someone I was comfortable with. I didn't just hire the first person.
Right.
I went through about 6, and I liked this editor, this service, and it's a big service out of New York, and it's not cheap, but I felt it was an investment. And working with her, she was wonderful. And I did 2 passes with her because I wanted it to be just right. And after and it was great because it was the first time I heard someone who knew my story, who read Penny's story, and it was so personal. And so then I did that. And after I was finished with the second content go around, I decided to change it from past tense to present tense. I do not suggest anyone do that, but I did. But I think it was also stalling. I wasn't ready to let it go. And then finally, my children's friends they said, enough is enough. Try to get this published. And I did.
So what was it like? You've gotten the book to the point where you say, okay, I'm ready to move to the next level.
Mhm.
And you started querying to pitch and ultimately work with a publisher. Would you talk about that process? Meaning, how did you go about it? How did you work through the pitch itself? That process might feel daunting to someone, and especially, or if they have tried and they've gotten rejections, they might feel a little, questioned, like, do I keep going, or or is this still the right path? I would love for you to share your perspective and the things that you did to maybe inspire someone else.
Well, I put together a list of publishers and agents that were in my genre, that, it was a natural fit. And I started sending out just little batches, to get my feet in there. And I got my first rejection a whopping 48 hours after I sent it. And I was just crushed. And a friend of mine, she was a writer, and she was the only writer I knew at the time. And I knew her years ago before she was a writer. And she said that she had a friend who was a writer of women's fiction. That was not her genre. And she got me in touch with her, and she got me in touch with the Women's Fiction Writers Association, the WFWA. And I poured through every webinar. I found out about hybrid publishing. I didn't know what hybrid publishing was. I thought you could only do the big 4 or self-publishing. I knew nothing about small presses. And so that really changed my perspective of, there are so many different ways. And also, I was getting encouragement from all these different writers who were reaching out to me. I met a dear friend who I adore. She lives only 4 miles from me, and I would have never met her without the WFWA. And now we have lunch once a month, and she is just signed with an agent. And it was wonderful to have had that. And so I started sending out again. I kept getting fulls, and was getting partials, but then I also thought, what about small press? What about hybrid? So I did hybrid. I sent out to 4 hybrids. I had 3 offers on the table that went in December when Red Adept Publishing, they're a small press. When they offered me, I jumped at it because I knew a lot of people from the WFWA who were, was working with them, and they had great experiences. So I jumped at the chance. And then back in this September, Blackstone Audio bought the audio book.
Congratulations. That
Yeah.
is awesome. What I'm hearing from this is a few things. One of which was you were willing to, like, one, you were viewing this all as an investment, where joining the association is a form of an investment because you're investing in yourself, you're investing in your business to see what else is out there, how to hone your skills, just all different aspects of being a writer in the author business. What I also heard was networking and the power of relationships. The fact that when you do find that community, whether it's because of an association or because you start doing different things and you start connecting with people, and you have that common tie of writing or publishing, or you're in that space, so there's an appreciation for what that really means and that effort that requires, that can really just help to bolster your confidence, but also just help to have that sense of community. And so that's what I'm hearing too, that this also afforded, not just the fact that it helped create that path. So I love that you mentioned that. Now, you did tell me something which I thought was really cool before we started recording, which was the fact that you were setting out for the book to be women's fiction, but then you got a review, a Kirkus review, then they were qualifying it as contemporary romance. So great that you got the review, great feedback to get, but tell me what that means to you, because if a writer is looking at reviews and they hear something different, I would love for you to share what you've learned and what you've done with that information.
Well, first off, when I got the Kirkus review, I was scared to death because they can be quite tough, and I got the get it. It was a great review, and I was thrilled. But then I noticed they put me in contemporary romance, and there's a huge romantic element in this book because she is finding a second chance at love. I mean, it's one woman's journey to either accept her troubled past by embracing the power of forgiveness or risk losing a second chance at love in a small Kentucky town. But my character goes through a lot. I mean, she's gone through divorce, and there's infidelity, and she's got death, and there's a lot in there, and she definitely grows. She is not the same person as she was at the beginning, thank goodness. She gets a little bit of a backbone finally. But then I started looking at what they considered contemporary romance. And I don't know if you remember the book last year from Carly Fortune. It was Every Summer After, and it was a huge book. And when I read that book and I loved it, they considered that contemporary romance. And it makes sense because there is the romantic element. She went back to her hometown. There were flashbacks. So I guess I'm thrilled to be included in anything at this point. I really am, because I read everything. I read historical, I read women's fiction, I read contemporary romance, I read, nonfiction. So I can live with contemporary romance if that is the group I'm being compared to.
Yeah, and what I'm taking away from that actually is another way to potentially talk about your book, that you might be able to, by gaining this information, it actually is a way of opening the aperture, in a sense of saying, oh, maybe it might be a blending of genres to some, and I might attract some other readers who may not have realized it because they might have been doing a search for contemporary romance and this book shows up, where if they didn't know, they might not have. So what I'm hearing was a gift of information to open the aperture and say, wow, what cool feedback is this, to be able to work with it some. So I love that you got that. Truly, I think that that's wonderful feedback because it gives you more insights.
And now that I look at it, it absolutely can fit in contemporary fiction. It can also fit in women's fiction and very much Southern fiction, because when I finally decided I'm going to be a writer, I wanted to be the Ellen Hildebrand of the South. She is my favorite writer, and all of her books take place in Nantucket. And when I open her book, I know exactly what I'm going to get. I know the food, the scenery. I mean, I love her so much. Last year, my friends and I went there to have the Ellen Hildebrand experience. We created ourselves. We didn't do her thing, but we even got to meet her. But that was what I wanted people to understand, because a lot of people, I don't think, know a lot about Kentucky. I think they think, maybe our basketball team or whatnot, but they don't, or they think people drink mint juleps and have racehorses. And that's not it. I want to show the beauty of a small town, the food. I write a lot about food, and just there's something special about a hometown that everyone knows your name. Sometimes it can be a little annoying because they do annoy Penny. But I want people to understand that that's a beautiful part of the country, and I want them to fall in love with it the way that even though I don't live there anymore, I want them to love it the way I do.
I think that's beautiful. And I love that when you're talking about that, you're really talking about bringing in an element of setting. You're really talking about making sure that setting is strong. So do you have some nuggets that you would be able to share, like some tips that help you to develop a stronger setting in case there's a writer who is saying, okay, how do I strengthen the setting in my own piece?
Well, for me, the part in this book, my second book, not as much, but I know Kentucky. I know what it feels like to be in a small town. But if I had a question, because I also wrote, part of the book is in Atlanta. I've never lived in Atlanta. My husband's from there, but I did a lot of research. You need to find out, I would sit there for hours and find out when do the daffodils bloom in Atlanta, a lot of research. But I use the elements of what does it smell? What does it smell like? What the taste, obviously the food, what do I see? What kind of trees are around? I was describing the grandmother's house, Ruby Ray's house, and I started visualizing what does a Southern house look like in that part of the country. And I would Google, and then that's what I would do. I did a lot of research, and I used my senses. What sounds do I hear? There's a whole part in the book that when Penny's running, I talk about what she's hearing. And that was the other thing. I also fell into the trap of POVs. That was challenging because I decided to write in third person for my first book. Probably not the easiest thing to try the first time. But I would just say, think about what your character is smelling and tasting, and the weather, the temperature. Think about what time of the year you want this book to take place.
I love that. I love that. And then to your point, I mean, that's also going back to bringing in some show versus tell, because you are showing by bringing in other senses to create more of a multi-dimension space for your reader to get immersed in versus saying, we're down the street, on this street, it's this house. No, usually it might be something like, well, force, a little bit further down when you hit the stoplight, then it's like the fourth road on the right type of thing, and then the mailbox to the left is where the actual turn is. So you're really kind of bringing more of the space of this is what it might feel like in this town or in this country space, if that's where you were creating your environment for your character. So to me, what I'm hearing is going back to the show versus tell, and strengthening the character too by showing, hey, this is what's going on and how she's responding to that too.
Yeah. So what what I did with this book, and I would be in my car listening to a song, and I would start mapping out the scene in my car through my mind. What am I seeing? And it was almost like I was seeing the scene as a movie. And then when I would get home to my computer, I could type out. And when I go back and read my book, I see it. I mean, I see it the way I wrote it, and I see it more than I even read the words. It's that point. But I will often go over dialogue and scenes in my head, and I'll even talk it out to myself. My husband, if he comes home, he thinks I'm crazy because I'm talking to myself. But that's how I get myself ready to just write. I don't just open up my laptop and just start typing. I have to kind of almost rehearse it first.
But what I'm hearing too is when you're talking it out, I mean, whether I'm editing or working on my own piece, reading out loud helps, even if it's an email or a social post, the book blurb, any part of that is really helpful because you, that the inflection comes through, you might catch an error, but in dialogue, you're also picking up on how you might have said something. And you're also picking up on the body language for the characters. You're picking up on expressions that might be happening, the tone where you might have one line that it can read several different ways depending upon what the tone is. And as you read or as you're saying it out loud, you realize, oh, this is the tone we need. And you add in some other pieces to make sure that's conveyed versus leaving the reader with, we could go a few different ways. What is this? And even making it harder out of an inference, you might not even be able to infer depending upon what it is. So I hear you basically using that as a way to build out more of the space, develop the characters more.
And it also helps because I have a feature on my computer where I can listen
Mhm.
to what I've written. And I would catch things, in conversation, you do not say, I don't, or I could never, or, I can't. So it's those little things. And when I would read back my dialogue, I was like, no one would talk this way. So I go back, but I also love to listen to what I've written because I also catch mistakes. You forget an and or a the or an or because you've read it so many times, sometimes you've forgotten it. But yeah, I like to I like to read it out loud. I like to go through it, prepare for it, and then I go write.
I I love that so much. Hope, this has been awesome. Where can people connect with you? Where can they get your books? Where can they find out more about the next whip?
Well, first off, again, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful. You can find me at authorhopegibbs.com. And I am on everything. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even TikTok. My daughter got me on TikTok. And it's Hope Gibbs, author Hope Gibbs. So that's where you can find me.
And where can they get your books?
You can get my book. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can get it on Google Play. You can get it everywhere. And then I also, with my audiobook, you can find that even at Walmart. So,
I love it. Hope,
yes,
this has been awesome. Thank you so very much.
thank you so much.